Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be ranking the starter decks that you would get in 2022 before standard shifts in September. We've got the 10 starter decks right here, and we're going to see if these are good, decent, or bad based off of my personal opinion. Let me know if you have a different opinion. Let me know if you agree with what I'm saying. Make sure you like and subscribe if you like the material. If not, let me know what you think would improve the channel. These both help me out tremendously. Well, let's get started right away and start with Avalanche. First things first. One of the weaknesses with these starter decks is you only get one copy of your big hitters like Ascendant Spirit and Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. But as far as starter decks goes, this is not bad. You have an Ascendant Spirit, which is great. Wish we had 4, but we don't. And that's kind of what the deck is going to be centered around. This deck works exactly like its name would make it seem like. It works around these basic snowlands and your Rimwood balls. It's going to have a lot of synergy with snowlands and snow mechanics. So the cards that are going to synergize well with snowlands is going to be your Ascendant Spirit, your Blizzard Brawl, your Avalanche Caller, your Spirit of Aldergard, Berg Strider, Graven Lore, and Icebreaker Kraken. One of the saving graces of this deck is one of the uncommons here. The Spirit of Aldergard is actually very decent. It's going to get the job done a lot of the times, especially later in the game when you have a lot of snowlands in play. If it doesn't have this card in it, I would probably rank this deck differently, but because this is in here, I'm going to have to rank this deck as a decent deck. I just really like the way this plays in many situations in the format. Up next, we're going to deal with Armed and Dangerous. In my opinion, Armed and Dangerous is a deck that tries to do too many things in one deck. In many ways, this deck is trying to be a tribal deck. If you look through, it's going to have a lot of things that have warrior in it. You've got core warriors, you've got human warriors, you've got goblin warriors. Everywhere you're seeing warriors, angel warriors, minotaur warriors, right? Matched with equipment like the dancing sword and runes like the rune of sustenance and the rune of speed. You got scavenger blade. So one rule of thumb I like to go for is if I'm going full tribal, I'm going to go for a mostly creature deck, and these creatures are what pump the other creatures. Much like that goblin deck that I'm going to be running here and posting a video about very soon. But you're not going to see a lot of equipment. You might have things that draw cards, in my opinion, like Shadow Down of the Scalds is good for the deck. It's a good way to get to more warriors. But this deck is trying to be an equipment tribal deck. And I don't think you can do both well at the same time. You have to do one or the other. For this reason, we're going to put this deck in the bad spot. It's not good. It tries to be too many things at once, and generally, whenever you're trying to become everything, you really become nothing as a result. You can play with this deck yourself. I am not a be-all authority on this subject, but in my opinion, this deck does not have much room to be played, at least well. That will bring us into Dungeon Delving. Much like Armed and Dangerous, Dungeon Delving is trying to do quite a lot with this build, but it has a couple other things going for it. The Archleech is, in my opinion, a lot of people don't like this card, but I honestly really like this card. It's a way to keep digging into your dungeon quicker and quicker, later and later into the game, and at the end when he attacks, you create a 2/2 zombie. He only costs 3. I really, really like this card. You also have some very powerful removal, like Vanishing Verse, where you get to exile a monocolored permanent, especially in the standard this card is in. It's a very powerful card. You will see this in almost every white-black deck, especially like Angels or Clerics. You're going to see this card a lot there. You also get stuff like Precipitous Drop, which gives -2/-2, and you get to delve into a dungeon. If you completed a dungeon, they get -5/-5 as instead. You also have Blood Chief's Thirst, which is destroy target creature, planeswalker with mana value 2 or less. If this was kicked, destroy target creature or planeswalker without having to worry about mana cost. Now, later on in the game, this is going to be very expensive removal for bigger creatures or more expensive creatures, but early game, this card is a great tempo card that will keep you in the game. You also get things that can slow your opponent down, like Silver Quill Command, where you can either pump your creature, you can return target creature with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, target player draws a card and loses a life, or target opponent sacrifices a creature. These things allow you a diversity of ways to control the battlefield in your favor, and it's just a very powerful way to control what's happening on the battlefield. You also get Yanti Fang Blade, where when he does combat damage, you venture into the dungeon, but he also has that death touch, so maybe a little bit of stalling your opponent out if you need to hit some of the things you need to hit. You also have Nader's Selfless Paladin, and he is able to venture into the dungeon whenever you deal combat damage to a player. I would like one more of those in the deck, but overall, this deck has great removal for a starter deck. It has pretty good control of the battlefield. It's got some creatures that have good synergies with dungeons, and even though dungeons aren't great, they're not perfect, we can forgive that and give this deck a little bit of a better rating than just bad, just because it's using dungeons. I certainly can't give this a good rating, just because delving into the dungeon is sometimes unnecessary and sometimes it's just outright bad. But as things stand, with the way this deck works, with its control and this and that, we're going to have to rate this as decent. It's not bad. It is a decent deck if you want to try out the mechanic of dungeon delving. This is going to lead us to one of my favorite decks that I started using right whenever I started playing on Magic the Gathering Arena, just to get the daily wins. I like the format, I like what the deck is trying to do, and that is Control Center. Control Center is one of those decks that I am torn on. I love black-blue as an archetype. Black-blue is very, very good together. On the other hand, we have to realize that control decks almost need a lot of rares, and they do need a couple of finishers. This deck has really good early control with rejects, flunks, good mid, about turn 3 or turn 4. Your Elder Fang, this Disciple will be good because the opponent's trying to save the bombs, right? And it hits you, use up your control, and then hit you with the bombs later. The Elder Fang Disciple will punish them for that by making them discard cards a little bit later in the game. Tazim Royal Mage will get your control back out of your graveyard in the form of flunks, rejects, poison the cups, that kind of deal. You have Dragon Turtle, which you can tap a creature an opponent controls, and that creature doesn't untap during your opponent's next untap phase. Nice way to start getting damage in on your opponent without taking any on your own. Really nice bit of control here. You also have Find the Villain's Lair, which draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards, or you can counter a target spell. And counter target spell is a little bit more powerful than reject, but it's a little bit more expensive. If you need more cards, you can always get more cards, and you just have a lot of control in this deck. You also have the Callous Blood Mage, which isn't great in this deck, but you can create a pest, which helps control the battlefield a bit. Nice little chunk blocker, you gain a life, or you could draw a card and lose a life. Or if an opponent's searching through their graveyard, like if you're dealing with an enchantment deck, and you're afraid of those enchantments returning to the battlefield, then you could always exile target player's graveyard. And you have a lot of options here. As the game goes on, you have Gelatinous Cube, which you can exile a creature under him. So he comes out, you pull a creature away, you get a creature, and you remove a creature at the same time. Nice little powerful bit of removal there. And furthermore, you get the Mind Flayer. And when he comes into the battlefield, you get to control a target creature until he leaves the battlefield. Very nice way to control the battlefield. I really like Mind Flayer. I used to play kind of decks that control opponents' creatures a lot back in the day, and it really gets people to scoop it on up really quickly, even if they're still well in the game. If they see this Mind Flayer come out and they're worried about more stuff like that coming out, they might not want to stick around for much longer. You also have a couple of dragons in the deck, and this dragon I'm not too sold on. He's 7/4/5/5, and when he enters the battlefield, you reduce the power of creatures. The only thing that makes this card pretty weak is he's 7/4/5/5 first off, and then second off, I really wish this had flash. And then you had the black dragon, which is a bit of removal, but you're paying 7/4/4/4. So it's a very late game card if the game even gets that late. But overall, you have really good control of the battlefield with this deck, even though it's mostly commons and uncommons. For this reason, hesitantly place Control Center in the decent decks. It is one bomb away from being in good starter decks, and I don't think it's even close to being in the bad starter decks. Let's move on to a deck that kind of is disappointing to me. I wanted it to be good, but we're going to look into Fireworks now. Thunderworks as a concept is interesting to me, and I've tried to make this deck work in many ways. I really enjoy some of the cards that are used, like Expressive Iteration. Thundering Rebukes were pretty decent for 2 cast, 4 damage, sorcery. Though I would prefer this to be an instant. Dealing 4 damage is pretty good. Matched with Agar the Freezing Flame. Awesome card whenever you're dealing damage to target creatures or planeswalkers. Fantastic for dealing damage, because whenever you do excess damage, you draw a card. So you get a returning value for, you use a Thundering Bolt, you draw a card, you draw another Thundering Bolt, you revoke something else, draw another card, right? And it's a really nice cyclical destroy creature kind of thing that you're trying to set up. The problem with that, with how this is set, or how this deck is constructed, is that you have too many creatures in it to make Agar really good in this deck. You have 3 Prismari Pledge Mages. You have 20 creatures, 20 and 16 non-creatures in a deck that's really wanting to burn your opponent out. That's not ideal. You would want more Creative Outbursts, you would want more Prismari Commands, you would want another Thundering Rebuke in here, you would probably want some burn cards, you would definitely want these Demon Bolts, you would want more things that allow you to draw more cards. You would want more stuff like Expressive Iteration, probably 4 Expressive Iterations, in order to cycle through and get the damage done on your opponent. Demolish is also fantastic if you had much fewer creatures, maybe 10 creatures at most, and we don't have a bomb. We don't have a bomb. Creative Outburst can be a bomb, but it's expensive and it only deals 5 damage. It's mostly to cycle through and look for the cards you need. But this deck is certainly missing a bomb. It is missing more control. It's missing a lot of stuff like drawing cards regularly. Like you could pay 6 and draw a card, but that's very expensive for a draw card. You would need more stuff like Expressive Iterations. You would need Behold the Multiverses, stuff like that, in order to make this deck playable. For this reason, we're going to sadly place Fireworks in the bad decks. It needs a lot more strength in its current state to do what it's supposed to be doing, which is to burn out your opponent and have kind of a tribal Fireworks deck thing going on. But I don't think fire or tribal and removal are going to work really well together. So it's got to go here. Don't worry, we will be covering the decks I think are actually good in this format very soon. Let's move on to Growing Hunger. With Growing Hunger, we have some of the big hitters of this format. We have an Ochre Jelly. So this Ochre Jelly is really nice because it enters with X/1/1 counters on it. You can pump this up as high as you want, and if it dies, if it had 2 or more 1/1 counters on it, create a copy of that at the beginning of your next unstep and take 2 of those counters off. The tokens enter the battlefield with half as many 1/1 counters on it, not 2, half. But generally, I usually cast it for 4, and you get a 2-time creature out of it. You could also, this deck also allows you to put 1/1 counters on Ochre Jelly with the Orin Reef Ooze. When he enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. When he attacks, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature with a 1/1 counter on it. This is a very usable card, very good card in this standard. Match that with things like Ranger class, which is always good. Whenever you attack, put a 1/1 counter on a attacking creature. As you can see, this deck is focused on 1/1 counters. The real big guy in this deck is the Vorinclex, which, if you would put more counters on a target permanent, put twice that many instead. So instead of putting 1 counter on these creatures, you are putting twice that many. So if you're putting 3 on a creature, you would put 6 on instead. So this is a very powerful card in a deck like this. It also has pretty good control with Power Word Kill, Poison the Cup, and Binding the Old Gods, which is a very nice removal spell. For 4, you can destroy target non-land permanent. So anything, if it's an artifact, if it's an enchantment, you can remove it. You cannot remove lands or special lands, but that's okay. You can also search your library for a basic forest, put it onto the battlefield, and then at the end of that, your creatures gain Death Touch, a bit more control with this card. This card has a lot of control. It is a very usable card in standard format at this date. The only downfall to this deck in particular is its speed. These 1/1 counters seem good at first, but you have to get to the mid game to really make this deck work. It also, besides stuff like Feign Death, it also lacks an ability to protect your own creatures as you're trying to get to that in-game situation. So, for that reason, we have to rate this deck decent. It is definitely a deck that is usable, but you have to really know what you're doing with those 1/1 counters and what you're trying to get to. Another thing, like the rest of these starter decks, is that you only have 1 copy of the things you really want multiple copies of. So we're going to put this in decent, and we're going to move on to Savage Lands. And this is where things start to get really interesting. Savage Lands is, for the most part, a hybrid of aggro with the Hulking Bugbear and landfall aggro with the Hellhound as well as the Brushfire Elemental. Brushfire Elemental is a great card. It is an uncommon. It has haste, and it cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So you get this guy out early, and you start swinging with him, and you get +2/+2 for every land that enters the battlefield. Evolving Wild, you play this, it is a land. You get +2/+2. You search your library for another basic land, either a mountain or a forest, and you get another +2/+2. You're swinging for 5 on turn 3. Very, very strong way to approach. You got to make sure you play him before you play your land on turn 3, though. Just a little bit of advice there. But this deck is fast. It has things like Bull Strength to get you over the top of people, gain Trample. It's got Werewolf Pack Leader, which is a very good card. If you swing for 6 or greater, you get to draw a card. You can also pump him up to a 5/3 in and of himself. You also have the Edcom Hellhounds, which are +2/+2 when a land enters the battlefield, but he doesn't have haste. And you can't block with creature 2 or less. You have things like Husky, which whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. He's also indestructible, but he has a swing every turn, so he can't block after the first turn. And you also have Owlbears. When he enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So you have a lot of ways to draw cards. You have a lot of ways to control your battlefield. You have a lot of ways to search for lands with these Vastwood Surges. It just has a lot of things you would want to do in a red-green deck. To top it off, you have Tachnar, and the big hitter in this deck is going to be World Sculptor. When he enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant token for each basic land you control, and when a land enters the battlefield, put 4 1/1 counters on target plant you control. So this card can get huge in a hurry. It's a shame there's only 1 of these in here. It would be really nice to have 2, maybe 3. It is a legendary creature, so you can only have 1 of these out of each name out on the battlefield at a time. But altogether, I really like the synergy that they came up with in order to create this deck. For that reason, we're going to give this deck good. If you just want to do your dailies and move on with your life, you don't want to learn about these other formats right now, this is a deck that will get you to where you're trying to go. It's very fun, it's aggro, it's going to be quick, and it actually works really synergetically with itself. So you're probably not going to have many complaints versing other starter decks. This is a good one to actually get your daily wins with. Let's quickly move on to Lifeline. Very interesting deck. This is another deck that I really change around a lot to make it really competitive in ranked. But this is the base deck that you're going to get. You get 2 Trilasara Moon Dancers, you get 3 Revitalizes, you get 2 Cleric classes, you get 3 Celestial Unicorns, 3 Core Celebrants, Minimus Containments, Lurking Ropers, Meet in the Taverns, and Drizzord. The main thing that this deck is trying to do is have a synergy with Lifeline and getting 1/1 countered while using Lifeline. One way this deck does that is by the Prosperous Innkeeper, which when a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Trilasara, when you gain life, putting 1/1 counter on Trilasara, Moon Dancer, scry 1. This is a way to make sure you're drawing what you want to draw every turn and being able to get your creatures bigger and bigger as you do it. If you start to run out of steam, you always you meet in the tavern, and you look at and you always form a party. Starter Brawl is very situational, and you can only cast it as a sorcery. You cannot cast it as a surprise instant. So, form a party is actually probably the best in this scenario. And if you want to cast a lot of creatures at once, Accomplished Alchemist can get you there. Drizzord is also not only one of my favorite childhood heroes, but also a pretty good card to boot. When he enters the battlefield, you create Guinevere, who is a 4/1 legendary cat who has trample. But the crux of this is whenever a creature dies, if it has power greater than Drist's power, put a number of 1/1 counters on Drist equal to the difference. So Drist is always going to be a big bad guy on the field, and he has double strike. He's got to be blocked, otherwise he gets through. With all the synergies of this deck, we are definitely ranking this one as good. If I had a fantastic spot, that's why he's taken up number 1 spot here, right? If we had a higher ranking for these, he would be there. Lifeline would be there. This is a deck. I have a video about it. I might link it in this video, but this deck is actually good. It's good enough to probably get you through gold if you play your cards right. I just love this deck. But let's move on to Sky Patrol. Sky Patrol is a deck that's trying to do something very different than a lot of these other decks. It plays with a fairly complex strategy of using the Stonebinder's Familiar to get +1/+1 counters on him whenever you exile a card, and that's done with the Foretell. Whenever you foretell a card, he is going to get a +1/+1 counter on him. You have it with Saw It Coming, you have it with Elite Spellbinder, you have it with Skyclave Apparition. Cosmos Charger makes it cheaper to exile cards or to foretell cards. You have it with Behold the Multiverse. You have it with the Aguirre Raven. So, you also have Unleashed here. Starnheim Unleashed. So you have plenty of ways to exile these cards. The thing is, you only do that once per turn in order to pump up Familiar. So playing multiple cards at exile will not pump Familiar more than +1/+1 every turn. So it has a bit of a weakness there. You have some okay control. There are some good cards in it, like Luminarch Aspirant. You also have Vega, the Watcher, which is pretty decent. You could draw a card whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. So it's okay. I think it tries to lean too heavily into the foretell mechanic without having much more to pump than a Stonebinder's Familiar, 3 of those, and Vega the Watcher. So, and it also lacks an efficient bomb. It doesn't have an efficient bomb. So this is the last deck that we're going to place in the bad. It just doesn't have enough going for it. It is not consistent enough to really be placed anywhere else. It doesn't have many saving graces, not many really good rares, and that's just a place it's going to have to sit in. Last but not least, we're going to go to Treasure Hunt. we're going to start right where we should. Goldspan Dragon. One of the better cards in the current standard, right before it switches over. Unfortunately, we are soon to say goodbye to Goldspan Dragon. So, it is a 4/4 flying haste, and whenever he attacks, create a treasure token. This is a very nice card to put out late game and just destroy your opponent. Awesome card used in a lot of decks. A lot of red decks use Goldspan Dragon at some point. They also have a red dragon. When he enters the battlefield, deal 4 damage to each opponent. If your opponent's down to 4, opponent is dead. But the main thing that this deck is trying to do is show you how to use treasures and sacrifice. Deadly Dispute is fantastic for digging through your deck. So, as an additional cost to it, you sacrifice an artifact or creature, then you draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. Very powerful, very good, especially knowing that you can sacrifice Shambling Gas to create more treasure. You could create 3 treasures and on turn 2, or 2 treasures on turn 2, and be really close to a Goldspan Dragon. But if you have Zorn out, you could create additional. So on turn 2, well, turn 3, really, you could cast Goldspan Dragon the next turn. You are also able to sacrifice things with the Skullport Merchant. Skullport Merchant, I think, is a very playable card, a very good card. If you sacrifice another creature or a treasure, right, you could draw a card. Match with Zorn, match with Deadly Dispute. You're going to have enough stuff to sacrifice to keep drawing cards and keep getting to your Goldspan Dragon, your Red Dragon, or, more importantly, either your Orcus, Prince of Undeath, or new Immerstrom Predator. This card is just a beast. Whenever he becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on him. Or you can sacrifice a creature, tap him, he gains indestructible till the end of turn, and you tap it. So you could block with him, tap it, make him indestructible, and sack another creature, putting a 1/1 counter on him, making him bigger and bigger and bigger. Great defender and a late game attacker. Prince of Undeath. When he enters the battlefield, you get our target. When he enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -X till the end of turn. You lose X life. So you could wipe the field out and have him on the battlefield swinging, flying, trample, 5/3. You also have enough control in the deck to make sure your opponent can't draw too much or build too much of a board state, which is incredibly important. So you have the Soul Shatter, you have Dragon's Fire, and you have Grim Bounty, which is going to help you get to these late game bombs. This deck is fantastic in a lot of scenarios. I wouldn't say it's as good as Lifeline, but I actually think that the meta will lean a little bit heavier into red-black and the synergies you can get from red-black. For that reason, we are going to put Treasure Hunt in our 3rd slot for good. It is a good deck, and you can use it in a lot of situations. It takes a little bit of practice to perfect what you're trying to do with red-black, knowing what to sacrifice and when, but overall, this deck will get a lot of wins if you're versing other starter decks. It stands up to a lot of them. It might have some trouble with Control Center, with Mind Flayer, but for the most part, you're going to be pretty solid against most of these other decks in the starting decks that you get. Well, let me know if you agree with this. Let me know if you agree with how I've ranked these decks. If you don't, I am more than open to hear what you guys think. But like and subscribe. Let me know what you like. Let me know if you guys would rank these guys the same way. Let me know if you guys would rank these differently. When it really comes down to it, Magic the Gathering is all about fun, and I had a lot of fun making this video for you today. I really like ranking things in this way. Let me know if you do, and until next time, have a magical day.